Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tizenhausen. Today is November 19th, and there are a lot of important news stories. In this episode, a massive shelling of Ukraine. Russia is once again striking apartment buildings. Trump is launching parallel negotiations, and Western media are reporting that a peace agreement could be signed as early as this week. To this end, a delegation from the US is arriving in Ukraine, and Putin is drafting the budget for the war while Maduro is bargaining for his own skin and asking Trump for another 2 or 3 years. A sabotage in Poland and the shadow of the Kremlin. Did someone actually decide to set up Lukashenko in this story? Iran, in words, claims to stop uranium enrichment, but in reality sends a secret delegation to Russia for nuclear technologies. And China, India, and Turkey have sharply reduced their purchases of Russian oil. We're putting all the pieces together in this episode. If this is your first time on this channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. So, once again, Ukraine has come under massive attack by drones and missiles. The main strikes targeted Kharkiv, Ternopil, and Lviv regions. Dnipro, Chernihiv, Kyiv region, Cherkasy, and Mykolaiv were also hit. In short, it was a massive bombardment. Of course, the strikes on Ternopil damaged several apartment buildings at once. There are also dozens of injured in Kharkiv. In total, 32 people were wounded in Kharkiv, including 2 children aged 9 and 13. And in Ternopil, of course, the horror of strikes on several apartment buildings, already 16 dead and 64 wounded, among them 12 children. My condolences to the families of the victims, and I wish a speedy recovery to those who were wounded. Nearly 50 missiles and about 500 drones were launched by Russia at Ukraine last night, targeting the energy sector, but as always, they hit a supermarket and residential buildings. In short, it's a complete horror. Take a look. This is the apartment building in Ternopil. Where is the military target here? Can anyone tell me? Let me repeat, strikes on Ukrainian cities have no impact on the situation at the front. Everyone understands that. Striking residential apartment buildings will not affect the situation at the front in any way. Attacking shopping centers and residential buildings is simply an act of terror, pure terrorism. It should be, well, probably somewhat more clearly and explicitly communicated to the international community, if we give well-known examples. Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden strikes the World Trade Center buildings. It's the same thing. That's pure terrorism. But for some reason, one terrorist was found and eliminated, while the other is allowed to keep fighting, and by the way, people are buying his energy resources. It just so happens that this terrorist, I'm talking about Putin now, is at the head of a state with a nuclear arsenal, selling oil, fertilizers, gas, and much more. But in fact, do you know what Putin has done? He forced the whole world to live by the rules of nuclear blackmail. Very few dare to say that this is the case, so it turns out that the whole world is powerless if a terrorist is in power in a nuclear state. Sanctions. Look at Iran and North Korea. They've been under sanctions for years, for decades, and they still haven't collapsed. Iran got slapped on the wrist a couple of times, and they announced they wouldn't enrich uranium. Of course, we're supposed to believe them. Yeah, right. Iran hasn't dismantled its proxy groups either. But what's the point of sanctions anyway? They can't even manage to kick Russia out of the UN. You see? So, there's an organization that's supposed to prevent wars, impose sanctions, and issue resolutions. But Russia has veto power there. That's all there is to it. The Organization of Restless Nations. It replaced the League of Nations, which also tried to prevent war but failed, so it was dissolved and the UN took its place. So the UN couldn't prevent the war and can't do anything about it. Is anyone even trying to do something about it? Absolutely not. Everything will stay the same. But there's another important point. This is already a kind of warning to civilized countries. If Putin is given what he wants, it will absolutely reinforce other dictators and terrorists, or dictator terrorists, in their belief that it's possible and necessary to achieve their terrorist goals. And if you have nuclear weapons, then it will be even easier to do so. If someone like Putin is punished publicly, as used to be done in the town squares, let's say the whole world becomes such a square, and of course we're speaking figuratively, bringing him out onto this square, if we push him to the point where his so-called great empire, which is really a colossus with feet of clay, starts to fall apart, then that will send a completely different message to all dictators. But we are realists, you and I. Politics and justice have never been synonymous. That's why the only way to punish someone who attacks you is to have your own weapon that can reach his bunker and destroy him there. When he knows that, he'll think 100 times before deciding whether to attack or not. Now, about the news that gave many people hope today, or maybe just infuriated some once again. A framework agreement to end the war. Russia and Ukraine will have it agreed upon by all parties as early as this week. A high-ranking White House official told Politico about this. Well, this news came out. We've already seen this more than once, within 24 hours, within 100 days, and so on. A framework agreement now, but there are a lot of interesting prerequisites to this news. First of all, there appears a delegation from the United States in Kyiv, that is, Army Secretary Dan Driscoll arrives, along with Chief of Staff General Randy George and other high-ranking generals. They arrive in Kyiv together with representatives of the Pentagon. Zelensky, let me remind you, is in Turkey at this time. So after negotiations with Zelensky in Kyiv, US Army Secretary Driscoll will go to Russia. With the aim of resuming peace negotiations on behalf of Trump, this is already being reported by the Wall Street Journal, citing sources. In other words, the entire format of the delegation is changing. Moreover, everyone is calling this delegation unusual, but after all, there is Witkoff, Trump's representative for Russia, and there is Kellogg for Ukraine. So what is going on? It turns out the Wall Street Journal provides an interesting, according to the note, the idea to send Driscoll. He is a classmate of Vice President Vance from Yale Law School. In general, the idea to send him to Ukraine and then to Russia arose during a conversation between Vance and Trump. Witkoff advised Driscoll, and he was briefed at an American base in Germany. At the same time, Peskov, now on the Russian side, states that we are not aware of this. We currently have no such negotiations planned. Even though it has already been announced here that they will gather and then go to the Russian Federation. So all of this is happening against the backdrop of the United States and the Russian Federation currently preparing a new peace plan for Ukraine. Why is it strange? Why the Secretary of the Army? He's a civilian after all. Why is it odd? Because international negotiations are not part of his responsibilities. He is not responsible for diplomacy, does not lead any peace initiatives, is not a member of the US Security Council, and is not part of the State Department structures. So, in fact, sending him is an anomaly if you look at it through the lens of standard diplomacy. But in essence, Trump is creating a parallel diplomacy. That is, Trump understands that he doesn't trust the State Department. I think that's the case. He doesn't fully trust Rubio either, who was harsh with Lavrov, among others, or Witkoff and their teams. He wants to leave all this bureaucracy behind, take it out of the equation, and essentially send his own personal envoy. In other words, Trump thinks that diplomats are, well, too liberal in some way, they're constrained by certain frameworks, they have to take into account a particular vision, the vision of the United States as a state, and so on. But here I'll send my personal envoy, consult with him, give him the talking points, show this to one person, show that to another, and that's it. And that's why the news comes out that a framework agreement could be reached by the end of the week. That's why this informal channel, Trump has always done this, by the way. In 2018 to 2020, he held meetings through Pompeo, bypassing the State Department. Negotiations through businessmen, personal envoys, he always had those. For him, everything always worked this way. The bureaucratic machine, on the other hand, is supposed to report everything, and sometimes things slip out somewhere. That's how these secret negotiations happen. Well, not exactly secret, but a personal envoy doesn't have to report like the head of the State Department. So this agreement of 28 points and 4 sections is most likely being presented by them. You know what worries me? That the people working on it are Steve Witkoff and Kirill Dmitriev, in other words, the United States and the Russian Federation. And afterwards, Kirill Dmitriev confirmed to Axios that while working on this project, he said, and I quote, "We feel that the Russian position is truly being heard." So in reality, they are developing this project between themselves and will simply present Ukraine with a fait accompli. Well, I mean, we understand where this is going, right? Although right now, Trump has enormous leverage in the form of sanctions. You see what's happening. China, India, and Turkey are significantly reducing their purchases of Russian oil. But Trump has decided that against this backdrop, he now has Amid internal scandals in Ukraine, sanctions, and possibly increased tariffs against those who buy Russian energy resources, he has leverage over everyone. That's why he decided to go for it to a certain extent. Trump is forgetting one important thing. You can't measure dictators by rational metrics. Well, we'll see how it all ends, and I have serious doubts that even a framework agreement will be signed this week. We've already been through all this. By the way, friends, let me remind you, those who are preventing Putin from fulfilling his dream of capturing Ukraine, who are stopping Putin from advancing, who thwarted his summer offensive, our Ukrainian heroes holding back the Russian army at the front, they need our help, yours and mine. We have an important fundraiser for night drones, Mavics plus Avengers, for the 32nd Steel, separate mechanized brigade, which is fighting right now in the hottest area near Pokrovsk. And the soldiers have recorded a message for us, as has the commander of the 32nd Separate Mechanized Brigade. Take a look at these bright and strong people. Please listen to this message.
Бажаємо здоров'я! Я командир батареї американських систем М109 Паладин 32-ї окремої механізованої сталевої бригади, яка зараз знаходиться на Покровському напрямку. Ми разом із глядачами каналу Бориса Тізенгаузена збираємо на комплекси Mavic 3T та Mavic 3 Pro та антени з репітерами до них. Ми дуже дякуємо глядачам каналу, які допомагають нам та не забувають, що війна триває. Дякуємо вам. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
This is for the commander of the 32nd Steel Brigade. Friends, let's help our soldiers, our artillerymen. The link to donate is in the description of this video. There are mono, private, and PayPal options for those who want to help from abroad. And to each and every one of you, I want to say a special thank you from myself and from our soldiers for supporting Ukraine. Both in saving lives and in the fact that our soldiers are putting up such a fierce resistance, your contribution is there. Thank you so much. If for some reason you don't see the payment details here, there's a QR code you can use as well. Now, let's take a moment to get back to the topic of how Vladimir Putin, at least according to some sources, supposedly wants peace. And let's also consider how, in the world of these particular lunatics, there is a constant effort to just try to make them seem normal to the rest of us somehow, in one way or another. So, the last Russian consulate will be closed in Poland after 2 acts of sabotage on the railway between Lublin and Warsaw. That's the news. The Poles have decided that's it. We're closing it. We've had enough. This is the last straw. And how do you think the Russian Federation reacted to this news? Peskov believes that Poland's decision to withdraw its consent for the operation of the Russian consulate in Gdansk is a sign of the deterioration of relations with Warsaw. According to him, the Polish authorities are trying to reduce consular and diplomatic relations to zero. In this regard, all that can be done is to express regret. It's simply astonishing, really astonishing. They do nasty things. So why are we surprised? For them, it's all according to plan. They do nasty things, then they send out the mustachioed show-off Peskov. Peskov comes out and says, it's very unfortunate, of course, very. We were not there, the drones aren't ours, the saboteurs aren't ours, nothing is ours at all, we didn't attack anyone, it's just your imagination, it's Ukraine lying to you, that's all, it's simple. And after that, more precisely, Russia always acts like a classic abuser. A classic abuser plays 2 roles, both the aggressor and at the same time the victim. Like, why me? This is called the abuser's double role, straight from the playbook. Yes, I hit you, but how could you behave in such a way as to provoke me? Do you understand? That's exactly them, it's textbook. And the whole world is like, well, okay, we'll just close the consulate. They just need to be crushed. They need to be destroyed, I don't know. It's a monster. You're feeding this monster. It eats, gets bolder, and blows up railways and all sorts of nasty things on your territory. It's just unbelievable. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. We'll drag the bald jellyfish and his secrets into the light and show his true face to the whole world, because I think Ukraine has become a mirror for the real Russia. Russia says, I'm an empire, I'm the strongest here, the great army, and Ukraine has become the mirror in which the real Russia is reflected. Its real greatness, its real status as the first or second army in the world, and so on. So Ukraine is being served to Russia by Ukraine itself. So subscribe to this channel, we talk about everything here. And look at what's happening right next to the United States. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro offered the US his resignation within a 2 to 3 year transitional period. He put forward this idea during unofficial negotiations. The New York Times reports on this. The White House rejected his proposal and demanded that he step down immediately. Well, last week, Trump held 2 meetings with senior advisors in the White House Situation Room, where the situation in Venezuela and possible US actions were discussed. And Trump instructed the CIA to prepare plans for several covert operations on Venezuelan territory, and also began secret negotiations with the Venezuelan government, which had been suspended last month. What a sly one Maduro is, right? 2 or 3 years. Please, give me 2 or 3 years and I'll step down. Actually, he wants to outlast Donald Trump. As I understand it, when Trump is already actively participating, or rather, not Trump himself, but his political force, the Republicans, are fully engaged in the election campaigns, maybe there won't be much attention left for Venezuela. Basically, Maduro thinks that after Trump, someone else will come along and they'll be able to make a deal. This is a classic tactic of an authoritarian leader who finds himself under serious external pressure. But at the same time, he has no intention of stepping down. He's testing whether the US is ready to make a deal. If they are, then he'll talk. This way, he's buying himself time, and of course, he needs a bit more time to stash away some assets, scatter them across different countries. And the most important point, which I thought about, is this. If Maduro truly considered himself the legitimate president and was confident in his mandate, he wouldn't be offering to resign to the US, he wouldn't be holding any secret negotiations, and he wouldn't be bargaining over timelines. After all, he wouldn't be asking for security guarantees. That's what dictators do when they realize that Maduro has already rigged more than 30 elections at various levels. Local ones, presidential elections and so on. He understands that his international support is minimal, so he has to negotiate. As for the economic situation, I won't even get started. It's a complete disaster. And it's important that Maduro understands he can't be sure of the security forces and the military. They might switch sides. That's why he's starting to negotiate. And he also realizes that China, Iran, and Russia are unlikely to save him. In other words, he could run away there, but they won't come to his rescue. That's why he doesn't believe in his own legitimacy at all. He's looking for a guaranteed way to get out alive. That's always a dictator's main fear. And Trump understands this, which is why he rejected the offer. And still, with this sabotage of the railway in Poland, something's off. Something is bothering me. Why? Because the saboteurs, let me remind you, one is a citizen from Donbas, the other has a Ukrainian passport. The one from Donbas also has a Ukrainian passport and apparently a Russian one as well. And the one with the Ukrainian passport has already been convicted of sabotage in Ukraine. So these are 2 agents recruited by the Russian special services. Unfortunately, they have Ukrainian passports. They lived in Belarus, entered Poland from there, and carried out 2 explosions on the railway tracks. So what is it about all this that bothers me? The Polish Prime Minister said that the suspects followed orders from Moscow and escaped across the border with Belarus. So there is no doubt that they are connected to the Russian special services. Poland even requested their extradition from Belarus. Here it would seem obvious. Lukashenko, like the sneaky scoundrel he is, as always, tries to cause trouble for Europe together with Putin, naturally. One moment he's sending migrants to storm the border fence at the Polish border, then launching drones together with the Russians. Now saboteurs have entered from his territory, and before that he was even sending cigarettes to Lithuania with balloons. In short, he causes trouble wherever he can. That's just how it is. But recently, 2 important events happened for Lukashenko. On November 17th, Poland opened 2 border crossing points with Belarus that had been closed for several years. And on November 10th to 11th, Lukashenko announced upcoming negotiations with a US delegation. So his goal is, and now it seems that Lithuania is also opening its borders with Belarus, again because of those balloons that were used for smuggling and had led to closures. So basically, Lukashenko suddenly has windows to the west opening up, and he's already rubbing his hands in anticipation. Now he's talking about lifting sanctions, and then this sabotage by Russian special services happens from Belarusian territory. Did Lukashenko really need this right now? Honestly, especially since the sabotage was just blowing up a meter of railway track, it looked really serious in the media, but in reality, that's all it was. Does Lukashenko need this right now? I'm not absolving him of guilt. He's an accomplice of Putin in this war against Ukraine, but he's also someone who could just slam those windows shut. The windows to the west that Lukashenko is opening. Let's try to solve this puzzle. So who is this Botoxed baldy? Or if Lukashenko is really that cunning, then theoretically he could have arranged it himself. A controlled sabotage, one without casualties. Then he could go to the west and say, listen, I can guarantee the security of the border, but the Russians are putting pressure, see, they're saboteurs and so on. Let's work something out with me. You need to offer me something stronger, something more powerful, and pay extra for security too. Then I'll definitely keep the border reliably closed. That's possible. Maybe now is the moment of truth. Will he hand over the saboteurs to Poland or not? Or what will he say? Or will they find them somewhere in the forest? Now, about how Putin wants to end the war. From the White House's hope that a framework agreement will actually be signed this week. Everything is there, the levers are there. We've talked about this. The only problem is that the State Duma and Putin have drawn up a war budget for next year. So there's no need to ask Putin whether he wants to end the war or not. You just need to look at the structure of the Russian budget, how it's been planned for next year. And it's been planned for war. And here's what happens if you trust a dictator. Iran said, after all, that's it, we're not enriching anymore. But now it turns out, according to the Financial Times, that Iran has asked Russia for help in developing nuclear weapons. How unexpected, huh? Iranian scientists and nuclear experts have already made a second secret visit to Russia. The US claims that it was aimed at obtaining secret technologies that could be used in nuclear weapons. So that's how it is. The trip was part of an exchange between Russian military and research institutes and Iranian enterprises. Their authenticity was confirmed using various reports, lists, data leaks, and so on. See how things turn out. If you want to swiftly and decisively end 10 wars at absolutely any cost, in reality, you'll end up starting 20 more as a result of these hasty endings. If you don't finish off dictatorial regimes, which will then learn from their mistakes, and authoritarian regimes that won't dismantle their proxy organizations, you'll simply make them stronger. Over time, they'll burrow deeper into their holes, hide their nuclear production even further, bury their bunkers deeper, and eventually come back, only this time having learned from their mistakes. And regarding whether sanctions are actually working, indeed, since the beginning of this month, Russian oil shipments to India have dropped by 66%. This is very, very significant. And shipments to China and Turkey, respectively, have dropped by 47% and 87%. So, this is how you can apply pressure, if only Putin had been pressured like this, at least maybe after the first year. But not in the fourth year after the full-scale invasion. If he had been pressured like this after the first year, he would have long since run out of money for this war. Well, as they say in Ukraine, we have what we have. Friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and subscribe to this channel. And let's help our legendary artillerymen from the 32nd Steel Separate Mechanized Brigade. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. Wishing us all a peaceful day, and glory to Ukraine.